Welcome back, everyone. This is Austin here at 2FC Tactical. Gonna dive back into some more Winchesters, right? We have in front of me some Winchester 1892s. So let's dive right in and learn a little bit about the history of these things and what they did. All right, so what we have today is some Winchester 1892s. Big shout out to one of our employees who allowed us to use a couple of his from his collection to talk about this as we're going through the Winchester lever action evolution, if you will. Now, of course, previous video we did the Winchester 1886, designed by famed firearm designer John Moses Browning. We have another John Browning gun, the 1892, which was a follow-up, obviously just a few years later, 6 years later. And the purpose of this is rather interesting. Now, first, please like, comment, subscribe. We really appreciate everyone who continues to give our videos the reach that we have, and we're very blessed to have the audience that we have. So thanks to all of you, and continue to share it and like the channel, and of course, support us on Rumble, Patreon, and everywhere that you would like to support us, Facebook, and as well as here on YouTube. Now, when it comes into these rifles, there's not a ton different between these rifles and the 1886 other than their size and weight. So while the 1886 was made for larger calibers like this 3856 right here, the whole point was to slim this down, make it a little bit less unwieldy. The 1886 is a big, heavy gun. It's made to take large bore calibers, as we talked about in the past, to hunt elk and buffalo and that larger game. But what if you're just a cowboy who just needs to, maybe scare off the bandit or two, or shoot, the coyote or the wolf or something smaller? You're not really looking for that large game hunting gun. You're looking just for that everyday usage firearm. That's what this was designed for. So they shrunk the whole thing down, keeping the same mechanisms of everything of the 1886. John Browning came back and just slimmed it up, lightened it up to give it a little bit more maneuverability, make it lighter to carry around. It's certainly not as long. And one of the key things he did was chamber it in the same cartridges that you would see your handguns chambered in at the time, the revolvers. And the reason why you would want this is so you just need one caliber to do both your rifle and your pistol. That was the idea. It was this kind of cross-platform availability of caliber, your 4440s, your 3220s. We have the 94, which would be the follow-up, obviously was in 3030, which is what this guy is, but you would see some of these smaller calibers here, like this 3220, for instance, and that's something that you could get for your handgun, but also have in your rifle. Again, it just kind of gives you that flexibility. You got to remember, the frontiersmen, people were just scraping by. They didn't have lots and lots of money. They couldn't have large firearm collections. They might only be able to afford two guns in general. So they needed something that didn't stretch the bank account just to feed. And, they would use these things to put food on the table. This is how they would live. So the idea of this kind of gun was really appealing. The fact that it could have that cross-platform availability of ammo while also being lighter and quicker and easier to use. Now, this gun was so successful that you will see some of our biggest pop culture stars actually use this. For instance, John Wayne. He was known to use an 1892 custom to 1892, I should say, in many of his movies. That's what you see. In fact, a lot of the times, those earlier films, cowboy films, that were set in like the 1870s, actually would use 1892s and not 1873 Winchesters or 1876 Winchesters, which would have been more period correct at the time, for a couple of reasons. A, availability. These were widely available. These were produced all the way up through 1941, so just right before World War II. Quick pause in the video, guys, to give a shout out to our channel sponsor, Patriot Mobile. Now, I've personally been a member of Patriot Mobile for several years now. Everyone is using a cell phone these days. So the question is, why not support someone who supports you, who stands up for the rights that you and I hold dear? And Patriot Mobile puts their money where their mouth is by donating a portion of every dollar they make to the causes that you and I hold dear. They use the same 5G networks that every other major provider uses. You're not sacrificing service. You're supporting a company that will support you. They're going to give our listeners a special discount. Using the code shall not and clicking the link down below, you will get a free month when you switch to Patriot Mobile. With that, let's get back to the video. And then secondly, the reliability. These things are extremely reliable. As we talked about before, the 1873 and 1876 Winchester are based on that Henry lever design and that toggle mechanism. It's not as reliable and had some issues, which is why John Browning went through and basically reworked the entire thing for the 86, and of course scaled up here to, scaled down here to the 92. That's the purpose. This has a lot in common, this 1892, with the current cousin, the Winchester 1894. Now, for those of us in the Midwest, the Winchester 94 is still used and widely available today. It is one of the most coveted hunting guns or treasures that is passed down from generation to generation. Everyone is looking for those pre-64 Winchesters, and then when they say that, they're looking for the follow-up to this one, which is the 1894. Now, Winchester wouldn't just end in 1892. Of course, they had the 94 that we just discussed. Then they had the 95 that they we follow that up with, and we unfortunately don't have an 1895 to do a video on, but when we do, we will certainly bring that to you in the future. We will be doing a future video on the 1894. The idea of these things, though, was really, really awesome, though. And, you know, I've had the opportunity to shoot several of these guns, these 1892s. Very smooth design, very smooth lever. This one right here is actually from 1893, so this is 1 year after production went into effect in 1892. And despite the fact that this thing is well over 100 years old, it's very smooth to this day. Very smooth lever design. It's real easy to use, real easy to shoulder, very light design. It's an all-metal gun. It's an all-metal wood gun. You would typically associate those with, obviously, some serious weight. And I'm not saying it's as light as your modern AR-15 or something like that. It's a little bit heavier than that, but it's still a very reliable piece. And again, this is kind of, and I don't mean to make these videos the John Moses Browning historical run. That's not the purpose of this, but in a lot of ways, this is what would put him on the map. He would just follow these things up with various designs. We mentioned the 1897 shotgun. We mentioned, the 1887 shotgun that he would also develop for Winchester, all in the same era. And that just kind of solidifies him as the go-to guy. You want something built, you want something redesigned or reworked or rethought, this is the guy you're going to go find. And this is building that legacy that would ultimately culminate in the, of course, 1911 and Ma Deuce, as well as developing cartridges a little bit later in life. We've already done a video on the his lever shotgun. We've already done a video on some of his other designs. But without these, you know, scaling that down, showing that he can take his idea from a much larger platform, scale it down to something that's a little bit easier to use for the average person, you know, maybe not that burly frontier huntsman or something like that, your kind of ranch rifle, if you will. That's kind of what this is more in line with, and be able to make it cross-compatible. He really started thinking outside the box on a lot of this stuff, and that legacy would continue forward to this day. But the Winchester 1892 is just a really cool pop culture gun. It's pop culture cool for us because if you're like me, I love the John Wayne films. You see him use these things quite often in the films. Even though period-wise they may not be correct per when they are supposedly filming or the scenario that they're filming that for. But the fact that it was so reliable that even Hollywood was like, you know what, we really can't ignore these things, just shows the longevity these things had. And to be produced all the way up through 1941 shows that they were still quite popular even later, as later designs came out. But again, props to John Moses Browning, again, for doing something really cool and, you know, pushing the firearm industry forward in some ways that we really haven't been able to top over 100 years later. I do hope you like this video. I hope you keep liking, commenting, and subscribing, and we'll see you on the next one.